Hello and welcome to CardsCast, a football podcast all about Woking Football Club. Through this podcast, you'll hear roundtable discussions, match previews and reviews, interviews, as well as us sharing our favourite memories of players, matches and seasons from the past. My name is Glen Harrington and I'm joined as ever by Jacob Greenwood to talk all about the latest goings on at the club. But before we get into it, remember to like, share and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts from. So, Jacob, we were just saying that this podcast has taken on a slightly different shape to what we maybe imagined it was going to when we were planning it last week. On a very obvious place to start, but before we get to it, what are your broad thoughts on everything that's been happening at the club in another tumultuous period?
Yeah, it's not quite an emergency podcast like some of the ones we've done in the past, where we've had to jump on kind of like the evening of the sacking or something like that. So it feels a little bit more chilled out than that. But yeah, it's been I'd say it's been a busy month. But I guess with the postponements and stuff like that, it's not been as busy with actual football as we might have liked. But yeah, I think definitely a lot of frustration in the month. Yeah, I mean, stuff like watching the Sutton game and stuff. I watched that on the stream and just wanted to launch my laptop at the wall. I mean, feel sorry for anyone that sort of made the travel to the game and stuff as well. And then, yeah, obviously, I think, funnily enough, actually, it feels like quite a positive time. But maybe that's a little bit too far. But I think, as with sort of all changes in manager, it feels like there will be a fresh start coming. If not, obviously, we've already had a little bit of one with a temporary management team in charge, and then one game which we've been talking sort of about how boring that football's been. I think people in general watching sort of all levels of football in this country anyway have sort of been remarking on how boring football's been at points, the way teams play sort of sideways and backwards and all that stuff. But yeah, watching our game on Tuesday, I thought was really exciting, and I'm just glad to see we had a go, and that felt a lot more kind of positive. We'll obviously go through the games and all that stuff, but I think the biggest thing for me was we were trying to win the game in added on time, and Boston didn't really have a chance in added on time, which, bearing in mind their form, they were at home, and our form as well. That was nice to see. So hopefully that shows we might have turned a corner, and we've sort of now got a chunk of the season still to come, which might be a bit more interesting than maybe we thought it was going to be a week or so ago, when we were sort of stuck in a kind of negative cycle.
I've got to ask as my next question, right decision for you on sacking Neal Ardley, or surprised? Kind of where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I don't think I'm surprised. I think everyone probably, broadly saw it as the right decision. I know a lot of people have sort of said, yeah, but what about Jody? He should have gone, all of this stuff. But I think where we are at the moment, you can't. I mean, you can get rid of him, but that won't change anything. If the manager was not getting the best out of the players, changing your director of football at the start of March, there's going to be probably no real impact of that. I guess, unless maybe you gave money to Ardley and Bassey and said, look, go and get your own players. But I just don't think that's the way it's going to work. Obviously you've got the squad is the squad at the moment, and can't really be changed much, without going, certainly until the summer. So yeah, I think if you think you can change manager and then they can get the best out of, or more out of, this group of players, towards the end of the season, then yeah, I think that probably is the right decision. I think everyone sort of saw that anyway. Anyone that saw Neal's post-match interview after the Marine game, I think probably saw a guy that was really honest and just sort of saying, the players aren't really listening to what I'm telling them, and I don't really think you can move on from that position. Obviously, also we knew that the trophy was a big aim for the season, so the crash out of that, not in early stage, but obviously to a team in the league below, and in a game we would wanted to have won, is obviously massively disappointing. So I think it does make sense when you look at it. It's always hard to tell when the trigger's going to be pulled at any club, I guess, isn't it? You sort of never really know what's going on, especially with a game coming up on the Tuesday. But I think credit to the club, they sort of moved quickly on it and got the temporary managers, I guess, in charge, coaches in charge, and obviously prepared us for Tuesday, and they'll probably prepare us for Saturday as well. So, yeah, not surprised. I think it probably was the right decision. I think it was the right decision, actually, to be fair, to keep him earlier in the season, because obviously after the Brackley FA Cup game, that was the other time when it sort of seemed inevitable that he would leave, and he didn't. And obviously, then we went on quite a good run, but then we've sort of gone backwards since then. So, I'd probably say the club got both of them right. But I mean, it's crazy, isn't it, how many sackings have taken place this season in the National League? It almost just seems now you have a manager for a season, maybe less, maybe slightly more, like we had with Ardley, a season and a bit, and then you swap. And so there just doesn't seem to be any long-term opportunities for managers, I guess, because all the clubs are either terrified about getting relegated or so focused on getting promoted. So again, when you look at that and see how many managers have gone this season, some clubs have had multiple managers, it probably isn't really a surprise. It was quite interesting, actually, seeing sort of rival fans and I guess sort of non-league influencers, if that's a thing, if that exists, podcasters, I guess, content creators, sort of, that's a really big surprise that Neal was doing great there. And I just think those people don't watch us, because I think the manner of the defeats was probably just as bad as the results, which meant ultimately you don't get the performances, you don't get the results. What can you do? I think so. That's why I think it was the right call.
I've just quickly tried to tot it up on my second screen, and I think that excluding managerial changes in pre-season, of which there were 5 in of itself, that's the 18th managerial sacking in the National League since the sort of middle of August, or when Morecambe, including theirs, I think their season hadn't technically started, but after the National League season had started, the 18th managerial change. And as you say, there's a couple in there like Yeovil, Morecambe, that have changed a couple of times, Hartlepool, but there's not a huge amount of patience, as you say. I think on my view on Ardley, I was surprised and not surprised. I was surprised by the timing. I think if you look at some of the extenuating circumstances that we'll get into, I think it would have been understandable had he been given longer. I do wonder if there was a degree of emotion in the decision, given the nature of the defeat to Marine, and also the backlash that it created from the fan base. I think we've spoken in the past about the fan base generally being quite an amicable one. Maybe over the last couple of years we've proven otherwise, but I don't think, with some obvious kind of social media outliers, that expectations are unrealistically high for our sort of standards that we want to set. And I think, I was just having a look as well at the run that we've been on. So it's 2 league wins in 9, dating back to the start of December. We've gone out obviously of the trophy to a team in a lower division. The only wins that we've had in the league this year were a kind of fortunate late win at Truro and that strong home performance against Hartlepool. Otherwise, we've really been scrapping for points. The defeats against Sutton, Wildston, I think particularly damaging, Braintree just before the turn of the year as well. So look, there's evidence there that there wasn't sufficient improvement coming, but equally I don't know that the position we're in is any worse than it was at the start of August, or rather at the end of August, after we lost our first 5 games, nor do I think it's any worse than it was in November after we got beaten 6-2 in the FA Cup by Brackley. So I guess I'm curious as to why now and why not then. But as you say, maybe it is just a accumulation of kind of those bad runs added together, no sort of consistent improvement, and that's proved enough. But I wasn't sitting there refreshing my phone thinking, oh yeah, this is definitely going to happen this weekend or tonight and he'll be gone. So I was a little surprised, and I thought, as I say, some of the circumstances that we'll come on to, that maybe he might be given a little bit longer to turn it around, at least until the end of the season, because I know we are mathematically in a relegation battle, but given the number of games in hand, the number of home games still to play, the evidence that we've had good positive runs this season, where we've had long stretches where we've gone unbeaten. I feel relatively confident that we will pull ourselves out of this current slump, and we will stay up probably relatively comfortably in kind of lower mid-table. I thought he might be given till the end of the season to show that there was enough there to warrant a contract extension, assuming that he is out of contract this summer. But the powers that be have decided now is the right time to make a change, and it'll be interesting to see what happens between now and the end of the season as a result.
Yeah, obviously that those sort of making the decisions, I guess, have a greater insight. We don't have much, do we? I guess because the club wouldn't post a lot of the behind the scenes stuff,
Sure.
especially if it was going badly. So I guess you sort of think that the mood must have changed, or get amongst the players, or amongst the staff, thinking before, oh, we think we can get around these challenges, and now it's sort of, we don't think we can anymore. And you're right, actually, it's interesting about the contract renewal. We were never told, I don't think, how long a contract Ardley signed. You would assume coming in when he did, it would have been an 18-month deal probably, which would have expired this summer. And I guess he would have been maybe wanting a new one. The club, as we can tell, maybe we're thinking other stuff, so I guess that might be a pressure as well.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, potentially, if we're being really pragmatic about it, it's a case that, like you say, contracts coming up at the end of the summer, there wasn't enough evidence there to support him getting a renewal. So you're facing the possibility of going into the summer without a manager, and by making this decision now, it allows you to bring someone in to evaluate the squad, look at who he wants to keep, who he doesn't want to keep, try a few things between now and the end of the season before having to go into a summer transfer window and starting to make those decisions without much to base it on other than, hearsay, reputation, etc. So, I guess similar in the way that Saul came in towards the end of his sort of the season that Douse was in charge. There wasn't really any possibility of us getting relegated, or we were just sort of playing the season out. But by giving Saul those sort of couple of months at the end of the year, it allowed him to get a head start on his summer business, and that sort of preceded what was our most memorable season to date. So hopefully, whoever the successor is, if it is a permanent successor rather than an interim appointment, that will kind of follow the same pattern, or at least the first part of it.
Yeah, exactly. I guess there's always examples either way, isn't there? But yeah, and I guess also now with the director of football, the continuity that they talk about, you hope that those kind of renewals and stuff will be slightly easier, because you've got someone else working on it. But again, the players, if you're a player here at the moment and you weren't getting on with Ardley and the management team, and you weren't being given much of a chance, you're probably thinking, well, I'm going to be gone in the summer, I don't want to be here anymore. All of a sudden, if he leaves and a manager comes in that does start playing you and you want to play under, you might think about signing a deal, and vice versa. There's some that might have been in the team and liked him and then want to leave. So the manager still plays a big part in it, whether they're actually actively involved in it, even if you've got a director of football running it. So yeah, it is good to get it sorted, and I think now gives us enough time. It's funny because obviously we're only in the first week of March, but there is quite a lot of games still to go. And you're right about sort of the relegation fight, as you do if you didn't look at how many games you've played. If you were just looking at the points column of the table, you probably would be quite worried. And then obviously you see how many games in hand we've got, and you think, obviously we'll probably just pick up points there, whatever happens. And obviously Tuesday was a good sign that, we're going to be fighting and scrapping and stuff. So yeah, I'd say one, actually, though, the one interesting thing is, and you always get this, obviously new manager bounces and all that kind of stuff, but it is interesting. I think if you look at the first game when Ardley came in, sort of the reaction we gave that day. I think we beat Altrincham 2-1 at home, and Altrincham were doing well that season. But the players were scooping for everything, going for everything. You know, it was quite attacking. It was really exciting. Compare that to the last game where it just looks like everyone's given up. I know it's a very different team, but you know, everyone's given up. And then you see the sort of reaction on the Tuesday game, and it's, you know, obviously there's probably slightly different tactics, but you saw a lot of players that all of a sudden came to life. And if they'd have played like that a few days before, we probably would have gone through in the trophy. So yeah, no, these things are interesting, and obviously a lot goes on off the pitch and stuff. But we'll see what happens for the rest of the season, and it would be nice to see if, you know, a manager comes in and goes on a you know, semi-decent run towards the end of the season, because again, that'll get fans excited for next season, and season ticket renewals and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, players will probably get excited, you know, and want to sign deals because they can see something going on at the club. So so yeah, I think it makes sense now. And again, actually, I've always said with you know, obviously I know absolutely nothing about running a football club or anything like this, but I've always thought that you must go in as a owner or whoever's in charge of stuff when it's going wrong, and talk to some of the senior players and sort of be like, what's the vibe in the dressing room? What's going on? Like, what are the players? Because I think then if you can kind of tell, like, a good 75% of the players basically have like stopped listening to the manager, don't like them, whatever. Like, you sort of got to make that change. But I guess no one's ever going to come out and say that. So you know, you would sort of never know. But yeah, that's why I think I agree with your thing about some of those spells towards the end of the seasons we've had before. Even the end of last season, really, it was annoying because we got so many draws under Ardley. You know, we didn't really lose many games the second half of last season, and there was this whole thing about we'd have had playoff form. Well, we did have playoff form in the second half of the season, but we also drew so many games that we ended up sort of getting dragged back into the relegation fight, which sort of ruined it a little bit and made it more nervy than it should have been. But again, I thought he had a perfect chance there to see some players and see who he wanted to keep and see where the gaps were. So yeah, you can always hope that that, you know, that's gonna happen again. But it all just seems so short term, as you were saying, with how many managers have been replaced in this league this season. It almost seems whoever you hire, you know, it's almost like they'll be on a 1-year contract these days and be like, well, go on. Like basically every manager gets a season. Unless you're doing terribly, then you won't even see out the season. Go and have a go, see what you can do. You know, obviously other clubs will buck that trend, and that'll be the clubs that do really well and probably have a little bit more money as well. But you know, again, it's so short term these days that, you know, it's really tricky to get it right. But we will see what happens next, I guess.
Yeah, a couple of interesting bits that I just was going to pick up on there. First of all, the players, and look, we don't pretend for a second to know anything about what's going on behind closed doors, and I want to be very clear that I'm not making any accusations. I'm only referencing things that have been put in the public domain. But Sude's comments upon his move to Forest Green about, you know, Woking don't play attacking football. We've talked off pod about some of the perceived treatment of certain players, rightly or wrongly. And as I say, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but you know, the Effiong situation, Frank Vincent last season where he was out of the team for kind of no apparent reason for long stretches, Hines and a couple of other players this season who, you know, players that generate excitement but don't necessarily seem to fit the mold of what Ardley looks for. And I think there's an interesting comparison point, and that we've spoken, I think, on every podcast that we've done this season about entertainment value, you know, value for money and going to watch. And there's been various comments this season about, oh, you know, I've not seen a home win this season or a home goal this season or whatever else. And it's really difficult, right? I think there's an interesting comparison point, you know, totally different worlds, but I've said on this pod before that my other team is Liverpool, and we have had accusations this season of being boring. And I think it's interesting that when you have a bad run of form, there seems to be this fear of the repercussions of that poor run of form. And, football is so results driven and so instantaneous, more now so than ever, that you can go from winning a title to you've lost 5 games in a row, we no longer want you to be our manager. And the response to that is to set your team up in a more defensive, solid way that reduces the risks, but at the same time reduces the flair, the entertainment. It puts handcuffs on players that want to play exciting football. And I wonder if it doesn't feel like we ever truly recovered from that really poor start to the season that we had. We lost those first 5 games. We went to 5 at the back. We shored things up. We started getting results. We were grinding out draws. We were getting kind of 1-goal wins, but the intent never really changed. And really, the downturn in form has come since we've tried to come out of our shell and at least on paper be a little bit more attacking again. He's gone back to 4 at the back. He's reintroduced kind of wingers, forced or otherwise, I think, because of the injury to Josh Kelly, and the results have kind of slipped away again. But it feels like we're playing with this fear, whether that's Ardley going, well, I need to pick up points or I'm going to get sacked, or there's just too much pressure, or whatever it is. And I just think it's an interesting comparison point that both of my clubs this season have faced adversity, responded to it by being slightly more defensive, trying to set up for kind of, well, let's keep it goalless for as long as we can and try and nick a goal. And the fans kind of universally going, well, we'll accept this if the results are really good, but the results aren't really good, and therefore you're reducing my entertainment and still not delivering good enough results, so it's not good enough.
Yeah, so the Boston game is a great example of that, in as much as I mentioned at the start, the added on time when it was 2-2 at the end, under Ardley, we wouldn't have left our own half. And what would have happened is Boston would have got the winner. Like, there's no science there, but that's exactly what you'd have dropped and dropped and dropped, and then you'd have lost. And then it's like we've defended, still conceded goals. It's just crazy.
I guess that's the perfect example then, because that's a managerial team who know they've got absolutely nothing to lose. It's a complete free hit. Whatever happens, they're not going to be the people that are going to be in charge come possibly even Saturday. Certainly not, by the end of the season. Why not have a go? You're either, if you get celebrated as a hero, or worst case scenario, you get a fan base going, oh, well, at least you had a go. We don't expect much from you. You're not a manager. Thanks for trying. Whereas, if you've got the job full time, the expectations are very different.
Yeah, definitely. But it's, but yeah, I think we get more out of probably our players. And I didn't think we looked very good defensively. Well, we've not looked good defensively for most of the season, to be honest with you. But when you're sort of attacking more, you don't have to worry about that as much, because you score more goals. So it's fine, because then, you might get a draw anyway or whatever. You might win the game. And I think it's also benefited other players. Obviously, you mentioned Asude. Ward's another one. Not that he said anything, but when he came off the bench the other night, he looked like back to the Matt Ward that we had seen, years ago when we first signed him. And then, whether it's been coached out of him or whatever, he just wasn't the same player. And that was, again, back to one of the problems at the start of the season. Are we signed this guy? We got him on a longer deal, or we've retained him, or whatever. He's this, we're going to play wingers and we're going to do this stuff. And then for whatever reason, they look like completely different players. It's almost like Space Jam, if people have seen that, where the players get the talent taken out of them by the aliens. Great film. Go and watch it.
A niche pull.
It's the game. But what's happening is, like, these players that were so good now look completely different. And again, like the other night, he was running from deep and all that stuff. So it's like that. As you say, like, whoever comes in, they'll have their own, issues, so to speak. And as you say, they'll be cautious probably about things as well, because we've seen managers like Ridlington at Aldershot that are just like, no, we're just going to attack every single minute in every single game, and it catches them out as well. So there's no
exactly. This is the risk, isn't it? Is that And I think this is why we're getting more and more situations like the one we were in, where you go, well, I'd rather set up and try and edge a close game by a goal or get a point than, set out to attack and get hammered. Because, if you do take that kind of all guns blazing approach, you are going to be on the end of a couple of beatings here and there. And it's very easy for us, I guess, as fans to sit there and go, come on, attack. But it's not our jobs or our kind of livelihoods at stake if it goes badly. And I do have quite a bit of sympathy, I think, for him. And the other reflection I would make just before we move on is that he's probably the first manager since Douse to leave us in a better position than what he started in. If you look at Saul, yes, he had that one very good season, but he left us in, basically in need of a takeover after all of the sort of misspending. Doyle picked up the pieces, but wasn't probably the right person with the right level of experience to be able to take a club that was kind of in the mess that it was and set it back on the right path. Yes, it's been pretty dry at times under Ardley, but he leaves us, having taken us from what looked like a point, probably a fairly hopeless relegation battle, I think, not long after he took over, to a club that should, all being well, finish, as I say, probably top 12, maybe, if we have a reasonable run to the end of the season. And that would be our best finish, in excluding the kind of one anomaly, would be our best finish kind of for a number of years in the National League. So I think he does deserve some credit. I think overall I'm in agreement with you that it probably was the right time to make the change, given the relative, I say with wanting to touch wood, but the relative safety that we find ourselves in. It gives a new manager time to come in and evaluate things before the start of next season, and hopefully it'll end up being kind of the best for all parties. And I think after the scenes after the Marine game suggested that one way or another a change needed to be made to kind of pacify the fan base and get the club kind of pulling together again, and hopefully that will be the result. Couple of other kind of bits that I thought it would be interesting just to reflect on. There was reference a couple of times to the injuries that have hamstrung us a little bit, and it does feel like the loss of Josh Kelly, Jake Foster-Caskey, and to a lesser extent probably Josh Asude as well, have made a noticeable difference in recent weeks. Probably our set piece taker and our most experienced midfield player, our probably most talented, certainly forward player, if not player, full stop. And then our kind of impact player, our plan B. And without those assets, the team doesn't look like it necessarily has quite as much to offer, albeit Tuesday was a nice reminder that there is definitely still some talent in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is probably where people have been more critical, I think, probably of some of the recruitment that's gone on, whether that's in the summer, whether that's during the season. I think some of the recent sort of in-season signings, potentially since Kelly, doing this off the top of my head, so might have forgot. I guess Foster-Caskey and Kelly came in relatively early, but I think a lot of the players that we've signed on loan or as free agents since then haven't been.
We're talking Boatswain, Silla, Flower, those kind of players.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're fine. They're like okay, but even then, I think I think on sort of a Twitter X exchange that Jody had done, I think before the Marine game, I think that the timing of that's right. Go back and read his feed if to fact check it, but I think he was saying, yeah, well, Asude's left, but we've got Gaboda and Flower have come in, so that's we've replaced them, and these guys are great, and I think they're fine. They're okay. I think, they're stopgaps really, but I think that's sort of where people have probably got a bit frustrated because, we've not gone and got actual quality.
More loan players as well, isn't it? It's a slightly different relationship when oh, this player's only going to be here for 12 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think, players like Flower, I mean, he's come from Crawley, who are right down the bottom of League Two, and they've basically gone, no, you're all right. We're in a relegation fight in League Two, but we don't think you're going to be any help. Like, I don't think that's like the big coup that it was sort of made out to be. And it's fine because some of them will pay off and, some of them won't. But it's just stuff like that. It's just, it just doesn't seem massively ambitious. And I think that's sort of where, and then, I guess you look at that and go, well, Ardley's had players taken off of him or, players who are injured and we've not got him backups or whatever. So that's where you can sort of, feel that maybe they were, slightly hard done by, but that's sort of where it is. And sort of, we've talked about it on previous podcasts, that's where we're at this season. The aim is pretty much to finish mid-table, probably top half, but around about mid-table. The aim was, I don't think, ever to get in the playoffs. Or if it was, that was like a massive stretch goal. So you wouldn't be signing players that were like the top players and splashing loads of money on them. So getting players that are just going to sort of fit in and get you to where you want to be does make sense. But at the same time, I do get it where it's like, oh, we've, lost this guy who's scored quite a few goals and he's got experience and all of this stuff. And we've replaced him with, someone that's either coming back from a long-term injury and needs game time or, whatever, it's not ideal. So I can see sort of why, again, it was maybe slightly harsh on the, on the management team who maybe wanted more stuff. But again, as you say, we sort of saw that on Tuesday where we're like, I know this team does, have strengths. And actually, if you're wasting players, either by leaving them on the bench and never playing them out of position or not motivating them, then actually, you probably don't really have much of an excuse.
Or just not allowing them to play to their strengths.
Yeah.
Ward is the perfect example, right? He has looked like a shadow of his former self at times this season, and how much of that is him being out of form, and how much of that is him, being asked to do a role or a job for the team that isn't kind of his best fit. I remember like people know that I don't get to a huge number of games, but I was at the Aldershot away game, for example, where he came on with a free role and kind of changed the game within a few minutes of coming on. That there is still a player in there, but it feels like, as I say, he's playing with the handbrake on at times because it seems to be a very safety first mindset, or has been under Ardley.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think you can make a good case for that when safety first sort of works. If we were winning games 1-0 every week, we could be like, well, it's boring, but actually we're moving up the table and actually this is quite good. But, when you there's kind of players that are, attacking or want to get on the front foot or whatever, and you're saying to them basically, yeah, don't do that. Again, you're wasting them. So I don't think there can really be many complaints, from that perspective.
This is my point that I was trying to make earlier and maybe didn't articulate brilliantly. It's the entertainment and the results, and in an ideal world you want both. If you can't have both, if you're getting one, you probably remain relatively satisfied. It's when you have neither that it becomes a problem.
Yeah, it does. And from a business sense as well, which, like, as a football fan, you don't really think about those things. You don't really care about those things massively. But, when you're asking people to pay 20 something quid to come and watch games, it's entertainment. People come for the entertainment value. And it does astound me still. We'll see what it's like when we actually get a home game on. But it's still, there were some of the games where, some of the ones over stuff like the Braintree game, stuff over Christmas, or, other games as well, we've got really good crowds in, and it's just been terrible. And it's just, it's worrying because, obviously the diehard fans will go week in, week out, and they're always going to go and they're going to get season tickets. They'll go home and away and stuff. But I think we have grown our fan base massively in the last decade or so. Especially, the home ones we easily get. I know the sort of attendances are sort of queried about what we're counting or what we're not counting, but they've certainly been a lot bigger. Some of the away attendances at the games, around London or the local area, we're taking like 400 fans to places, which was sort of unheard of, like years of, like, as I say, like a decade ago or something. So, if you're building the club from a business point of view, again, you want to attract that fan base and keep them. And if people are paying that money and it's just not interesting at all, and you're not winning, I think it becomes really hard when the renewals come up in the not too distant future. Again, I think if we'd have just stuck with what we were doing, a lot of people might have said, you know what, I'm just not going to bother for next season. I might go to a few games, but I'm not going to renew. And that'd be a massive hit to the club and a massive disappointment if you've managed to build up that fan base. But, in this day and age where it's so expensive to go to games, which is, across the board, and it's nothing unique to Woking, you sort of feel like you still have something that's a bit exciting. It's not like you pay a fiver and it's like, oh, well, not going to notice that. It's like, it's decent money, which you could be spending, doing other stuff. So, yeah, it's, but yeah, it's the same thing though, isn't it? Right? If we were, as you say, if we were all guns blazing, and we don't want that probably to be the case, and new manager comes in, doesn't bother defending, and we lose 4-0 the first few games of there, like people are going to moan about that as well. So like it's a balance.
Am I right in saying as well that this is the year the 5-year season tickets expire? So you ideally want to be going into this sort of summer season ticket renewal window with as much positivity and momentum as you possibly can to attract those sales, because that money coming in is potentially going to be a bumper year, because people that won't have needed to buy one for a number of years will be renewing, and that money is potentially what's going to fund, you would hope, a stronger year than what we've seen over kind of the last 2 or 3. And if we're going into that off the back of a third successive relegation battle, playing boring football that very rarely generates any excitement and certainly doesn't generate many positive home results, it's a lot harder to sell, isn't it?
Oh yeah, massively. It's and money's tight for a lot of people. So if you've got one thing a weekend or whatever that you want to go and do, or obviously with stuff like a season ticket, you pay for it up front. But if there's a choice between that and going on a holiday, or whatever you're spending your money on, you've sort of got to make people feel like they're getting their money's worth. So it's always tough. But I think that the tough part is attracting that fan base, and then sort of keeping them there is the next thing. We've attracted people. So, but yeah, I mean, if people that are dedicated enough to get 5-year season tickets, that's crazy in itself. So I'm sure they'll be back. But as you say, you've really got to make the most of it, because otherwise, things can start to slip away. So hopefully it'll be exciting towards the end of the season, and by this time next month or whatever, by the time we get near the end of the season, we'll probably look back on this spell, and it'll be a distant memory, because I'm sure it'd be better than it was. And as you say, the messaging is then crucial for next season. If this was kind of the consolidation season after a few relegation battles, this was we want to start to build a squad, finish mid-table, have a go in the trophy. That was basically this season. Well, if the next season is, we want to start actually putting pressure on the playoffs, you'd hope the budget goes up, because it will need to, and then we can focus less on getting those kind of discount signing, if that's the right
we might
way.
actually sign a forward that belongs to us rather than one on loan.
That's a really good point. But it's just you'll actually go out there, and we all remember that summer where we did, we were signing Reece Brown and Ammon and Kellerman, and it was like, wow, this is proper stuff. This wasn't, we're getting this guy on loan who scored like 2 goals in his whole career at the senior level or something, or he's been out for 3 years and he's just coming back, whatever. Like it's one of those ones. So, and that'd be exciting. If you get the messaging around it right and the timing right, people will buy into it. But you do have to be careful, because I think Ardley said in the summer, didn't he? He was like, we want to try and win the league or something crazy, which looking back was maybe a little bit ambitious.
Couple of other kind of major bits from the last few weeks to go over. I don't know what we're going to say about this one, but I need to bring it up because it's been such a big talking point. The ground, the pitch, all of that mess from start to finish. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, is that just the pitch question mark?
Yeah, pitch question mark.
Yeah, it's basically crazy. I mean, it's like, it feels like I've not been to Kingfield in like absolutely ages. I was making my way.
League game in 2026, and we're in March.
Yeah, and obviously the trophy game happened as well, which is sort of the problem, which which is why the pitch got destroyed. So fine. Obviously that happened. So yeah, I mean it's massively disappointing. But to be fair, from the pictures the club have put out today, which is Thursday when we were recording this, there were pictures of the other end of the pitch. I mean, because we've not played on it in such a long time, the weather's actually got quite nice in recent weeks. The pitch is like almost perfect, other than that little bit which has obviously now been repaired. So it'll probably be an amazing surface for the rest of the season, which we probably haven't had in recent years. The pitch is kind of dead by the time we get towards the end of the season. So that's something. But I mean, it's massively frustrating not to play home games. As we say, when people's hobby is going to watch Woking play, even if you just do home games or whatever, then you've not been in ages. And then when you have been, it's probably not been very good. Obviously, there was the 4-0 win, as you say. So there's that. So yeah, I mean, it's the club will learn from the communication side of it and all of that kind of stuff. I was someone that was sort of had paid for my train ticket and paid for my car parking and stuff on the way to the Solihull game.
I think that must be the most frustrating thing, is that you can forgive it happening once, but having it happen twice in a row in such close proximity and not learning any lessons from the first time it happened. And, I remember you messaging me to tell me the Solihull game was off, and I was like, it's like a joke, isn't it? It's played out to the letter, the same timing, the same messaging about, they're so happy to play on it. It's just this one patch, and it's like, the referee is so pesky calling it off, and it's like, but this happened like a week ago. Did you not think the same exact thing was going to happen again if nothing had changed? But yeah, like you say, hopefully the club will learn from it. I know that there's a relatively new groundsman, isn't there? Obviously a new ownership, new staff, lots of new people kind of behind the scenes at the club. The communication sort of this week leading up to the Tamworth game on Saturday seems to be much better. It's a shame that they've needed to have what's happened twice in order to get to this point. I don't think there's too much else we can pick apart from it. The club know that it was bad, it was embarrassing, it doesn't make us look great, it's going to cost them money. They'll be aware of all those things. It's what it is, I guess.
And again, it's similar to what we were saying about the managerial stuff. Is there's stuff that goes on in conversations and considerations that we aren't privy to or know about and would never be made public anyway. But there'll be a lot of stuff about, I know there's this whole thing about, I guess it's the National League, like you must give a game like every chance to go. You can't pull it off 2 days ahead because you're like, whatever, you have to do all of these, you have to really try and get games on. And I think if you're then calling games off probably too far in advance, you're basically admitting your pitch is completely screwed, which it was. And then at which point they would probably be saying, well, you need to go and play somewhere else, which obviously we've seen. I think both Halifax and Rochdale both played at, I want to say, Accrington Stanley in recent seasons when they've not been able to get games on. So I guess if you basically sort of admit that your pitch is completely screwed, you might start having those discussions, which are, a whole nother level of problems. So, who knows what goes on and all of that stuff. But yeah, glad to see it's hopefully been sorted. We'll see what happens. The weather's been great, so hopefully
we should say the degree of sympathy, obviously, as well. It's been a pretty horrible winter. The amount of rain has been, ridiculous, and it was unfortunate the kind of perfect storm around the Macclesfield game with, they'd called it off once, hadn't they? And then they were desperate to get it on, started it under conditions that were acceptable. They worsened significantly over the course of the game. That game probably shouldn't have finished. It did, and the pitch kind of paid the price for it. Have you seen the Kings Lynn story? I wasn't aware of this until today, because they've just sacked their manager. For anyone listening that isn't aware, they were forced to call off a game last month because of too much sitting water and a waterlogged pitch, and then CCTV footage was emerged of them using a sprinkler on the pitch in the build-up, which effectively caused the problem themselves. And the manager ironically complained of too many leaks inside the club and has now been sacked as a result. Kings Lynn, as I remember them from their time in our league, were always a little bit of a circus going on there, but yeah, I just thought it was quite funny, and
At least we've not done
it
that. I guess that's
shows it can always be worse, doesn't it?
exactly. Right, though, with all of these things, like there's always going to be like excuses, I guess, for stuff in a sense, but like people don't care. Like if you've spent all of your money, like if you're an away fan coming down or stuff, and it's like, we've called a game off at 2:15, and it's like, yeah, but don't you know that the water drainage stuff is like the
Yeah, they've
stream,
come
and the
from
stream is
Manchester. They
full, and
really
like,
don't care about
yeah, like
drains.
no one gives no one cares. It's like when your train gets cancelled or something, and they're like, "Yeah, but there's like this thing," and you're like, "I don't care because it's ruined my thing anyway." So there's only a certain amount of time you can get away with it for, and yeah, I think the club got burnt by that by thinking that people would probably be like, "Oh, as you say, oh well, if both teams wanted to play on it, then." It
It's
must
the
be fine, and the
referee's
ref is
fault.
to blame. Yeah, it's like it's never gonna, and we
Then
have played on
another
some
referee
shocking
came up,
pitches.
and it's his fault as well.
Yeah, and we've played on some shocking pitches, home and away. Like, but it seems that the standard now is probably a lot higher than it used to be, when you could just get away with basically playing
Yeah.
on a beach in the second half of the season. So,
I showed
there is that.
my dad the pictures of that did the rounds, and he did the classic, over 60s answer. Oh, anyone, we should have been able to play on that. It was like perfectly. Back in my day, anyone would play on that pitch. It's like, yeah, it's not quite how it works anymore.
No, not in the modern times. And actually, that Macclesfield game did feel like a throwback, because you could have the ball. There was so much water on the pitch that the ball wouldn't move, so that it was just in the air the whole time.
I'm pretty
Otherwise, it
sure
just wasn't moving.
that penalty, if Craig hadn't dived on it, wouldn't have actually crossed the line anyway.
Stopped in a puddle on the thing, like the Joey Jones one, where it.
Well, yeah, very appropriate given the opposition that it was, and the same goal mouth. So
yeah. So it's
different version of Macclesfield, but yeah.
Oh yeah, very true. Yeah, it's but yeah, obviously, hopefully, I mean, the weather's been great this week, so you'd assume this weekend will be on. But again, that's one of those things. I don't know how long it takes turf to settle once it's been laid, but that's not my job.
I think there'll be there'll definitely be some fear, won't there? And I imagine probably it will knock a little bit off the attendance of people going, yeah, you say it's fine, but we've been here before.
Yeah, and I don't really know what we do if it gets called. Like, I mean, it's been like 16 degrees and sunny for most of this week, and then we call it off. Like, but I think the National League might just kick us out the division if we do that. So we've probably got to be a little bit.
I think we should just say, there's a park opposite. Let's just go play on that. That's fine.
Yeah, Kingfield's ground is probably doing better than ours, so might as well go to their ground. So yeah, no, and again, we're going to have loads of games, so I look forward to it, and I'm sure a lot of people do, because when your hobby is going to watch Woking play and you like football and all that stuff, when you're not playing, that's just not what you want. It feels like the summer or something where there's just no games. So yeah, it'd be great to get down there, and now hopefully we might see a team that tries to score some goals. So there's that too.
I can do a little sales pitch here for the club if I can help them out for a minute. If you do like going to see Woking play at home, and you are hopeful that with the change of manager we might actually try and attack, you've got 9 home games between now and the end of the season. Because they've piled up. So if you want to go to them, there's plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, basically every Saturday and Tuesday we should be fine. So it's
should probably release like a quarter season ticket or something. You probably get quite a good deal.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, and it probably will be more interesting than the rest of the season put together. So there you go. That's an extra. Can't guarantee that, but yeah. Bearing in mind we've only won a few times at home all season, it can only get better.
Yeah, but if we just give the tickets away, it'll be fine. Right. Well, there's one other elephant in the room that we need to address, which is our director of football. Obviously gave an interview in the aftermath of the Ardley sacking earlier this week. As you referenced earlier, I think the fan base has got a bit of a divide, really, in that they wanted action to be taken and they wanted someone to go, but they weren't necessarily united on who they wanted to go. My view, for what it's worth, is that I still don't feel like I understand enough about what Jody does day to day to know whether he's adding sufficient value or not. I thought that the interview he gave was relatively defensive. I guess you would expect it to be. Credit that there were calls for someone to come out and front it and say something, and he did. So credit has to be given for that. There wasn't anything, particularly groundbreaking in there. There were a lot of platitudes, promises that things would get better, but there's a little bit of a shrug from my perspective and go, yeah, I've heard that before. The proof will be in the pudding. And until we see some of those improvements pay dividends that he's talking about, we can't really judge whether what he's doing is being successful or not. I think one reflection I would have is that, Ardley has paid the price for the situation that we found ourselves in. Jody is clearly going to be there for the foreseeable future, but I think if the next managerial appointment that he's involved in doesn't work out, I don't think he'll see another one.
No, it's difficult. Yeah, director of football, it's the first proper one we've had, really, isn't it? So it is a bit odd. And I think that sort of stuff is probably good to probably see more results from the stuff they're doing rather than just, sort of, as you say, being told, no, it's great, we're doing loads. And it's like, but like, A, where, what is it? And B, where are the results from this thing? There was lots of stuff in the summer, wasn't there, about, we're going to have live data, like, coming to the bench and stuff. Well, God knows what that data is telling the bench, because, like, it's terrible. Like, it's the eye test of the
0 shots in the last 3 games.
Yeah, they might have used some of this data to confront Neal and say, look, it's not good enough. So they might be that.
Exited at our half twice in the last 45 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think it does XG, but I don't want to know what our XG is because I don't think it would have been very high.
Can you get minus XG?
We might have done this season. So I stuff like that. I think that for fans that just go and it's just like you watch it and it's like when managers, I guess, say you've seen one game and they tell you something completely different and you're like, I just saw it with my own eyes. It's really difficult. So there is that sort of stuff. But director of football, I think if you did change one, you would have to make that change right at the start of the summer, if not a little bit before, because it sort of feels like that's when they sort of come into their own and are doing a lot of their stuff. So I think as and when that happens, that would probably be a better time to do it rather than, as we say, the start of March or whatever. So but I mean, the only thing I would say is I guess fair play to Jody in a sense that I think he has tried to sort of engage with people more on Twitter. He obviously tried to engage with fans at Marine. He's sort of done this interview. So there is a lot of stuff there, but obviously at the moment, times are slightly tough. So those conversations are, quite heated. And then, as you say, it becomes quite defensive. And
I completely recognise that he cannot win. He either says nothing and he gets criticised, or he comes out and tries to say something, tries to have positive conversations, and he'll get criticised by a portion of the fan base for that as well. So I do accept that it's a bit of a no-win situation, but equally, I understand the frustration. I think this sort of fascination with director of football as a role in football, which has become more prominent over the last decade, maybe slightly longer, it feels to me like it's just almost introduced an additional tier for fans to be critical of. If you don't like the performances on the pitch, you criticise the manager. If you don't like the players, you criticise the director of football. If you don't like the way the club's being run, you criticise the owner. If you don't like any of them, you criticise all of them. And it feels like, across I was looking at some of the stats earlier that, over the last sort of 5 years since COVID, we've had 4 managers, 3 different ownerships, director of football introduced. I don't think the fan base have been particularly happy with any of them.
And that's football, isn't it? I guess. And it's the one thing I would say actually that is quite interesting, I guess, is that I think from Jody's perspective, he would probably say, stuff like, well, so it's been made quite public that Jody was the one that went and found Josh Asude, gave him the chance, wanted to bring him through, and obviously that was one that worked. Played well for us and left.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say I did see the message that Josh posted upon his move to Forest Green on Instagram, specifically called out Jody and said, like, thank you for giving me my chance. And I don't think there was a mention of Neal. Read into that what you wish.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not too difficult. That's the thing. So I think someone who who's it and go, like, I went and found this guy, I signed this guy, we had this guy, and you basically decided never to play him. because you didn't
Must be
like him or
very
whatever.
frustrating from Jodie's
And
perspective. Like,
yeah,
particularly when you can see the rapport he's got with the fans, the difference that he is able to make when he does get a chance. Must be very
and
frustrating.
And the thing is, if that was just in isolation, you probably could say, yeah, he is very raw. Like, I can kind of understand it. When he did get a start, he got sent off, whatever. But he's not the only player. I mean, Frank Vincent last season was one that, I thought our midfield was crying out for someone there.
Mm.
Started well, just got completely
Yeah.
dropped out of nowhere. He did
I
come
thought,
in a little bit near the
he made
end.
us better when he played. I thought it was
Yeah,
really weird what
massively.
happened to him. And there was that rumor, wasn't there, about, oh, if he plays X number of games, we have to sign him permanently, or we'll owe more money, or whatever it was. And it's like, yeah, but if we don't play him, we're going to get relegated.
Exactly. And he did come back in there at the end of the season, especially in the trophy when we didn't have as many players because some of them were cup tied. But I mean, Innie as well this season, whatever happened there. But like the director of football would have been like, well, you have this striker and now you're saying I don't have any players, but you're refusing to play this guy.
I can't play direct because I don't have the players to facilitate it. Well, you got rid of the one that would have allowed you to do it.
Exactly. Tyreek Hines, another one this season, brilliant at the end of last season. There's obviously been some kind of falling out, you would assume, because it's now like, we're just not going to play you this season. So again, you've got some of these players.
We'll play you left wing, despite the fact you're a right back.
It doesn't make any sense. So some of that stuff, he must be sort of pulling his hair out, being like, well, I've got, and that's not all of the players, as we said earlier. Some of them probably haven't been great. I'm sure we'll release some in the summer. Some have been 2 years deals.
In there, that like, he is right when he points out like the enthusiasm that was there in the fan base over the summer when you're getting, Matt Ward on a 2-year deal, Chinicoli on a 2-year deal, Jaskalainen re-signing, Ward re-signing, like that they were all positive things at the time, and he can't influence what they do on the pitch. He's kind of 2-3 steps removed from that. So it's really difficult to say, isn't it, without knowing the inner workings of the club and exactly what the state of that relationship was, exactly who's making what decision, how collaborative it is or wasn't by the end. It's impossible to know, isn't it?
It all comes down to results as well, doesn't it? Like, if you're winning games, nobody cares. But as you said earlier with the Innie Effiong thing, when it's like, if you're going to start chucking out excuses or you're not winning games or whatever, people are obviously going to say, well, you've got this guy who's quite good or does fit this profile or whatever, and you're refusing to play him. Like, it's just, it is crazy. But you do get that disconnect. But the only good thing about having the director of football over letting the manager do everything is when the manager leaves, you are not just left with all of the players that they've signed. And they've got loads of players, because we got that a bit under Doyle, I think, as well, where it was sort of when it was like, oh, Kieran Harris is like really good friends with them and now just like wants to leave the club. People like Judge, I think it was like, oh, I only came because of that specific manager and now they're not here. So you always get some that are, closer relationships or whatever, but I think maybe it's slightly, better when you have the director of football thing. So yeah, I mean, look, yeah, it's a tough gig. I certainly wouldn't want to do it. I do feel slightly sorry for him, but fair play to him. I think sometimes when you see managers leave clubs as well because of form or whatever, and it certainly happened at Woking where frustrations have boiled over. Managers have been arguing with fans and all of this kind of stuff. So I probably would say although there's probably some questions for Jody to answer, fair enough that he's I guess making the effort to come out there in what seems like quite a respectful way and actually speak about stuff. It's is sort of commendable. So but as with everyone in something like football, you'll be judged by results and what happens next. If he gets, then the next manager's wrong and they do terribly, then he'll probably play with his job. But if they come and take the squad to the next level and we do really well, then again that'll be on him. So we'll see, but certainly an interesting time. I don't actually think he needed to do that interview for what it's worth.
No, I agree.
I think he could have waited until a new manager came in. Maybe we've got a couple of results with the interims. The vibe is up there a bit more. And if I was like, oh, a new manager, and you've got this guy in, and hopefully, obviously, it's a name that people like, and then you can ride off of that a little bit, and then talk about what's happened through the context of we've already sort of put it right. But I get it. But you can't win, so it's
the timing of it at the moment is purely just an acknowledgement of what's gone wrong and a promise to that kind of stick with us. We will put it right. And like you say, maybe that's better timed in a couple of weeks when we've got we've had a home game go ahead. We've got the new manager in place. We've had a couple more positive results. The kind of the apathy and the frustration has calmed, and people have approached it with kind of clearer heads. All it's going to do now, I put this on Cards board, like the people that are open to it will continue to be open to him and what he has to say, and the people that aren't will continue not to be. It's not going to change anything. Therefore, was there really any point doing it? There you go.
Yeah, no, definitely true. But hopefully, he has some more positive stuff to talk about. But I guess again, if he'd have done it slightly later on and would have maybe won some games or whatever, then I guess his angle could have been, well, I was right because I signed this squad and I said these were good players and they weren't doing anything under Neal, and now I've got rid of him and now the players are doing better. I was quite clearly right to do this thing.
Yeah, but I mean, he found the manager as well, didn't he? So it
Oh, yeah.
only works when you're sacking someone that you didn't appoint.
Yes, very good point. So just also people sort of forget that, like, we all have jobs, we all work, and the story we would like to spin sometimes at work might be, one that's just positive towards that. Like, so
Yeah,
you're not going to come out because again, as I said, with stuff like the Ardley interview after the Marine game, I think he knew the writing was on the wall, but it probably didn't do him any favors that he sort of was like, the team aren't listening to me. It wasn't anything to do with what I did, but they just didn't carry out what we said
it was
to do.
basically just it was like, I've run out of ideas, hasn't it?
And how did that work out?
It's like, if you're sitting there as the decision maker, you go, okay, you basically just handed in your resignation.
Exactly. It's tricky. So it's but there's always got to be a lightning rod somewhere, isn't it? And as you say, with the director of football, that now seems to be just another thing for people to go after. So, but it does make sense. We've been as frustrated as anyone about stuff. So, but actually, to be fair, some of the clips of the stuff where Jody was talking to fans at Marine, as I've seen videos from other clubs where stuff like that has happened, and it did seem like a very kind of genuine sort of back and forth. Where people were just saying that sort of what's going on, we're not very good. Asking, these sort of genuine questions and concerns, especially if you've travelled all of that way and, things have been going wrong for a while. And, fair enough that, there's not much he can do in that moment, but, I think fair play to the fans as well. It didn't seem like it was overly abusive and people were really going after him or whatever. It was just, the frustration of it. And, it's good to do that rather than run away and hide. I mean, we'll see what happens next. But to be fair, up until this point, the only time he really did interviews were when things were going well and just sort of took the credit for it. So I guess you've got to take the flip side of that. When it doesn't go well, you've probably got to put your hands up and say, well, it's not going well, which, fair enough. It's not. So you can't get past that.
Agreed. Last couple of bits before we wrap up. We've talked a little bit about the Boston game already, as you say, an encouraging performance after the last few weeks. Just wondered your thoughts on the interim management team. I know I'll give it another little plug here. If you scroll back a little way on this podcast feed, you'll hear Jacob's interview with Craig Ross, who was not Woking manager at the time, or didn't have that on his long list of Woking roles that he's got on his CV. But academy graduate, player, coach, now manager. It's quite a nice story.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's hopefully it's a really short spell because as we saw when the I think Sal left and we had to wait sort of 6 weeks for a new manager to come in.
I'm surprised that there haven't been calls for Ian Dyer to come back as interim manager. And that's nothing against Ian. He was great while he was here, but I think that might have run its course.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the first time, the second time, not so much. But even again, so if you look at those games that we played in that spell where he was there the second time, there was no reaction at all, really. We carried on being as bad as we were. I think we won the Dorking game, which was his final game, and then I think Doyle joined the next day, and that was it. But it was sort of 6 weeks of just being as bad as we were before. So, the fact they got that reaction and the fact that, I think in his post-match interview, he just said, we just really got on the front foot and took the game to them. And that's what it was. Instead of going sideways and backwards, we just sort of got the ball and went forwards. And, we didn't look perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And the goals were quite scrappy and stuff. But again, if you if you're not taking shots, you don't score. And before we weren't creating chances or taking shots. So if we're just taking, shots or whatever, and it hits someone and goes in, great,
Oh yeah,
fine,
I
that's
think it was
fine.
the second goal summed it up really, because I think it
Mm.
was Gabodi picking up the ball on the halfway line, bursting run, lays it off to O'Brien, kind of scuff shot, deflects it off the back of Sanderson's heels. But it's like, well, at least someone took the initiative, made something happen, and look, you generated a slice of luck. Those things can happen when you take some risks.
And also, Boston have to be more careful in the way they play. So we're talking about added on time at the end of the game where we were trying to win it. Well, that meant that they had to be quite careful because they didn't want to lose it, because that would have been quite a damaging game for them to lose. So again,
I only
it's
saw
something
the
else to think
highlights.
about.
You know the answer to this. Did we leave someone forward at a corner, or did we bring 11 players back to defend? Because that still, I think Neal was asked about it in an interview, and he kind of explained, like, this is why I do it. I still don't understand. It's a stupid thing to do.
Yeah, I'm not actually too sure what we did for those. The camera probably wasn't wide enough to see what was going on. But there were definitely loads of.
Surely it doesn't take a genius to work out that if you leave one player forward, they'll probably leave 2 defenders, maybe 3 defenders back, just to guard against any possible counter attack. If you have 11 players in your own box, they will bring everybody forward.
Yeah, and when we had a Sude, he would have been perfect for that role, because they're like, well, he's fast, so we've got to keep those players back. And obviously, he probably wouldn't have won many headers defensively anyway. So, it's different. But yeah, again, it's like teams, then they're sort of fearing us in added on time rather than thinking, oh, well, Woking have got every single player in their own half defending for their lives. Well, we can push everyone up. Similar to what you're saying about the corners, it's like, well, there's no threat coming from them, so we can chuck everyone forwards, and then the pressure's on us. So
it's inevitable, isn't it? And that's that's where we get hurt.
The big test, I think, will be Tamworth on Saturday, where where we've probably looked most useless this season or hopeless this season is when teams come to Kingfield and are almost like, well, over to you, Woking. You're at home. You take the initiative, and then we're like, oh, we don't know what to do. Or Sutton away, right? They go down to 10 men, and they're sort of like, well, we'll drop everyone behind the ball now.
With their third choice goalkeeper as well, who we didn't really test. That was I watched that game. It was so frustrating. We just created nothing.
But again, the Boston game, and actually, some other games as well, where it's like you're away and they're attacking, and you're like, well, we can counter attack you and whatever. We can, we don't have to set the tempo of this game really. Whereas at home, pretty much it's always the case that we've got to take the game to them and do something. And as we've seen, then it's like we freeze and we go sideways, and it just doesn't work. So it'd be really interesting what happens on Saturday. But I think given what happened on Tuesday, it'll probably be like, go out there, be fearless, have a go. You might as well. As you say, this interim period is not going to last forever. That might be the final game of it, or there's only a couple of games of it to go. So, go.
Well, to be honest, I keep refreshing my second screen because I am slightly nervous that we're going to announce a new manager halfway through the podcast. I'm expecting that by 9:20, I'm probably safe, but there's every chance that I normally put this out by about sort of early Friday afternoon. This could all be completely out of date by then. We don't know. Because my last question is going to be who do you want as the next manager, and we might already have one. I don't know.
Yeah, my knowledge of managers has never been that great, and I think that you see that online as well sometimes, where it's like, who do you want as the next manager, and people's shortlist will genuinely be Ian Dyer, Gary Hill, just everyone that's ever been here, or they might know someone,
or people that have been around in our league for 10, 15 years. The McMahons and the likes that everybody knows, or because they've managed all the shot. And let's be honest, we're not going to go and get one of those. So to be fair, I don't think it is beyond the realms of possibility that we would go after a Darryl McMahon. I don't suggest for a minute that would be a good, and it certainly doesn't seem like it would be a popular appointment, but I don't think that's unrealistic. We won't be getting Tommy Widdrington.
No, I think, well, to be fair, I guess this time with Ardley, or last time with Ardley, we went with the been there, done it, experienced approach.
We've had the novice.
Yeah, I do wonder, but I guess the novice wasn't appointed by this setup, so I guess maybe they'll feel like they've been burnt by having the experienced guy that's maybe a bit stubborn and want to go down a different route. But as you say, we've seen it with Limbrick, we've seen it with Doyle, we've seen it with however many managers, that
Even
there's
Sal to a
downsides to that
lesser
as well.
extent. He'd only had maybe a couple of years of managerial experience. I think a year, like a few months for Stevenage, and then maybe like 18 months for Yeovil, something like that. It wasn't, most of his experience was sort of academy based. He was still quite young. We've not really gone for that kind of middle of the road, proven kind of coming off of a successful job. Like Ardley had been out of work for a year or two. It kind of hadn't had a great experience at York and Solihull, where he'd had a reasonable budget behind him. And I remember it wasn't a universally popular appointment, was it, when we appointed him? It would be nice to go after a youngish manager with experience that is coming off the back of a successful period, even if it's at a lower level. And I like you, I think my knowledge of names is not great, so I can only really talk about the profile that I'd like to see. The other question I had is with whether you expect it to be an interim or permanent, and I think we've probably answered that from the discussion that we've had so far, is that there's no need desperately to change it away from one interim setup to another interim setup to get us through to the end of the season. Better that we take our time, find the right appointment, and then hopefully give them 5-10 games to judge the squad, start making some decisions ahead of the summer. But yeah, I would hope that the only thing that changes that is that if you find the person you want but you can't get them until the summer because they need to see out a contract or a season at their current club. But I would hope that we're looking at who's doing well at National League South level, or even the level below, that is a up and coming proven manager.
Well, McMahon would probably fall into that category that you're talking about, where they probably wouldn't come until the summer, because I think he's at Hornchurch, who are doing really well in the Conference South. So, like, why would you give up?
Yeah, they have had quite a significant dip, I think, recently, because they were leading the way for quite a long time, weren't they?
Maybe he should get out then. Maybe this is his chance to disappear. But yeah, again, like it's stuff like that, where if someone's got a team like 90, a bit like Dowse, where he came in the summer and it's like, well, he got the chance to take Hampton through the playoffs, and then as soon as they didn't go up, he came to us. But at least he got that chance.
I guess that's that felt like take the person out of it for a moment. That would be the sort of profile that I would like to see. Someone who is at a unarguably smaller club, but has had success at that level, and is ready for that kind of step up.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was probably one of the best, and that was really cool at the time, because it was like, well, who's basically the guy that knows this league and has done really well at it in the last few seasons? Him. Well, who are all the players that have done really well in this league and probably also played with him? Okay, we'll take them as well, and obviously we bounce straight back up because of that. So it's yeah, but no, as I was saying earlier though, like I think in this day and age where managers don't seem to last very long at this level, 18 months or 2 years is seen as like a really significant stint these days. I don't think you have to worry too much, especially with the director of football doing a lot of the signings and a lot of the off the field stuff. So you've got the continuity there. If someone comes in and it's like they've lasted a year or whatever, 18 months, like it's not like you're signing your life away. I think sometimes it can feel like that. Oh, what if we go for the person with not as much experience or whatever? Well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, because teams just seem to be hiring and firing, and unfortunately that's just going to be how it is, I think, unfortunately, at this level. If they do well, they'll probably move on to a bigger club, and if they don't do well, they'll leave. It sort of feels like it is what it is these days. It's not the Premier League where you're handing out 10-year deals or 5-year deals or something.
We can't all be Chelsea.
Well, yeah, well, don't even. But it's crazy, and I know you've got to offer them a significant sort of deal or package or something. Otherwise, they won't come to your club, because they want the certainty and security of it, which is fine. But if you give someone deal to the end of the season, and then next season with an option or whatever, or something like that.
We
I
had
think
our
that's
fingers
absolutely
burnt
fine.
with style as well, didn't we? Where we gave him that extension when things were going well, and then suddenly we've got 18 months worth of contract to pay off to get rid of him with no plan or any kind of expectation that was something that was going to happen. So I understand what you're saying. I guess my hope would be that whoever it is starts to implement some sort of identity, because it feels like we kind of lurch from one system and plan to the next without any real consistency, and hopefully, as you say, having that director of football role, that is something that should allow us to do that in a slightly more effective way, rather than it being a complete start from scratch each time a new manager comes in. You go, okay, there is a way that we do things, a way that we play, a profile of player that we target. The obvious examples at a Premier League level are clubs like Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford, where the manager might change, the personnel might change, but the club stays consistent. And there'll be other clubs at this level that go for a version of that approach. And in an ideal scenario, like you say, with the level that we're at, if a manager comes in and does well, they'll move on and they'll go higher, or if they don't, then they'll move on for other reasons. So that whoever it's going to be, we're probably gone are the days of having a Gary or even a Douse that's going to be here 5, 6, 7 years. Obviously we would like that to happen if there was someone that could come in and be kind of consistently successful, but realistically, modern evidence tells us that we're going to have someone for 12 months, 18 months, 2 years at most. Can they come on? And I said earlier, I feel like Ardley has left us in a better position than what he picked us up in. So can the next person come in and leave us in a better position than what they find us in now? And that would be, for me, a sign of continued progress under this ownership and director of football and the setup that we've got now.
Hopefully, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if any rumours will come out of people in the process, or if we'll just sort of see the final product. But it'd be interesting to see. I would be interested to know, how popular the job is as well. Like, it has sort of the off the field stuff where they seem to have made, got the director of football and sort of got things in order a little bit. Is that something that is more desirable to people now, or do people watch games? Will managers have been watching the game the other night and been like, wow, actually that squad looks like something I could take on and do something with, and retain some of them in the summer and then build on it, or something like that. Hopefully there's a decent amount of managers, because what we probably saw, I think, probably when we appointed Doyle, is that maybe showed that there wasn't that many managers that were in the frame, because then it sort of feels like it wasn't that strong an appointment. So we will see.
Yeah, so there was just one name that I was going to throw to you, which I thought was an interesting one that came up on not our forum, but one of the others that I was just having a look around at. I don't know, it's probably not a realistic one, but Eric Ramsey, who was at West Brom for all of 9 games, I think, earlier this season. And I think I'm right in saying has got links with our owner from his time working in America. 34, been in the setup at Manchester United, I believe, in the sort of coaching setup under Solskjaer and Ten Hag. Been involved at a Welsh national football team level as well. I imagine that's it's not necessarily a realistic appointment. It just a name that I'd seen mentioned, which I thought was interesting.
That 0% win record at West Brom might be a bit of a red flag. But 42% record at Minnesota United. So there's that as well. So you never know. Obviously, as we've had this discussion before, because this podcast has sort of outlived many managers. But the perfect manager is not going to come to Woking, or we wouldn't be able to afford them, or whatever. So whoever you hire is going to have some sort of question, over their name, and that's either they've been somewhere and not done amazingly like him, or have much experience. So it's sort of it's one of the two things really. You've either got to take a punt on someone with no experience, or if they're really experienced, that experience probably will be shaky. Otherwise, they'll be at a higher level. So yeah, we will see. But it's really hard to predict. I think a lot of the times when we've tried to do it in previous years, it's sort of been a left field name that we hadn't talked about that's sort of come through at the last minute, and I guess that shows us that that's how it works. But I guess it would be mainly managers out of work at the moment, but I mean, there's going to be loads and loads of them applying, but if they actually meet our standards and ambitions and what we want, I guess is another question. So hopefully they've got a strong set to choose from, and I guess that's all we can ask for really, where they've got a good set and can sort of make the right decision based on the style of football we want to play and the ambitions we have and what they think they can bring to the club. So that's what makes it an exciting time, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can let us know your thoughts on everything that's been going on at the club, and there's definitely been a lot going on recently. You can let us know your pick for new manager or new profile of the next manager, and all your thoughts on directors of football, pictures, everything that's been going on. You can find us under the link to this podcast on Cardsboard, or you can send Jacob a message at Cardinals1887. But until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you soon.